Please, I want a new housekeeper. She should be efficient, discreet, and professional.
It was a great experience for me to serve this household.
You will be greatly missed, Helen.
Helen had worked in the Kang mansion long enough to understand its silences. It was the kind of silence that did not come from peace, but from absence. The absence of laughter, of shared meals, of footsteps that lingered instead of passing through. Since Madame Kang's death 13 years earlier, the house had transformed into a museum of routine. Everything shone. Everything functioned. Nothing lived. But her pregnancy grew difficult, and the day she nearly fainted polishing the staircase rail, the illusion of strength she had clung to finally shattered. The doctor's verdict was firm. She had to resign. The morning she left, she bowed deeply to Mr. Kang, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You have served this house with dignity," he said, voice controlled, almost rehearsed. "Your position will remain open if you ever wish to return." It was the closest he had come to gratitude in years. When the door closed behind her, the mansion did not merely go silent. It echoed with the shape of her absence. The need for a new housekeeper arose. Then Mr. Kang made the call that changed everything. Mr. Kang called on a Wednesday. Efficient, discreet, professional, the three qualities he listed in order, as though reading from an internal ledger of requirements. The agency manager, a woman who had been placing domestic staff in wealthy households for 20 years and could read a client's unspoken needs the way a doctor reads symptoms, listened carefully. She thought of 3 candidates before he finished speaking. She recommended one. "Her name is Jaya," she said. "She's new to our registry, but her references from her previous employer are exceptional. She is hardworking, quiet, and good with detail. She's indeed what the Kang mansion needs." Jaya received the call while sitting on the edge of her narrow bed in the small room she rented with 2 other women from her hometown. All 3 of them newly arrived in the city. All 3 of them trying to transform hope into something practical. She nearly dropped the phone. Live-in position, stable pay, immediate start. The address was in the kind of district she had only seen from bus windows. Tree-lined streets, iron gates, the particular silence of serious money. She called her mother before she did anything else. "Pray for me, Amma," she said. "I think something good just happened." Then she knelt beside the bed and did the same herself, forehead bowed, hands pressed together, whispering gratitude into the thin carpet of a rented room. Unaware that gratitude was perhaps premature, that the thing she was grateful for was in fact only the beginning of something she could not yet imagine. That fate had just swung open a door onto a future that bore no resemblance to anything she had planned. The taxi ride lasted 40 minutes. The city she knew. Markets with shouting vendors, concrete apartment blocks stacked like drawers, intersections where 1,000 small lives rushed past each other daily, gradually gave way to something else. Streets widened, noise thinned. The architecture grew stately, then opulent, then almost theatrical in its scale. When the iron gates of the Kang estate swung open, slowly, with a weight and precision that suggested they had been designed to impress, Jaya sat forward in her seat and wondered, briefly, if the driver had made an error. The mansion rose before her in glass and pale stone, flanked by gardens that had been sculpted rather than merely planted. A fountain at the center of the drive caught the late afternoon light and scattered it in small bright arcs. Beyond the main structure, she could see a greenhouse, what appeared to be a guest pavilion, carefully shaped hedgerows running the length of a side garden. She had packed her things in a single worn suitcase with a broken wheel that she had learned to compensate for by tilting it at a slight angle when rolling. She lifted it from the taxi with both hands. "Just work hard," she told herself. The words were her mother's voice, borrowed for the occasion. "Send money home. Do not be careless. Do not make a spectacle of yourself." She walked toward the front door. Before she could knock, it opened. Mr. Kang was taller than she had expected. He wore a dark suit without a tie, a concession to the end of the workday, perhaps, or simply his standard domestic uniform. His face was the face of a man accustomed to evaluation, and he performed it now with minimal effort. A single measured glance that took in her posture, her clothes, her expression, the grip of her hands on the suitcase handle. She bowed deeply. "Thank you for this opportunity, sir. I will work hard and not cause trouble. Efficiency is valued here, he said. Helen will have left instructions for the main routines. Review them tonight. He stepped back from the door. She crossed the threshold of the Kang mansion for the first time, the suitcase bumping awkwardly against the doorframe, and thought, I can do this. I just have to be careful. She had no idea, yet, how magnificently she would fail at that particular resolution. She learned the house the way she had learned everything, by paying close attention and making herself useful before anyone could question whether she belonged. She memorized the precise temperature Mr. Kang preferred for his morning tea, hotter than most people took it, held for 3 minutes before serving. She learned which corridor tiles were laid slightly uneven and which ones made noise underfoot. She learned that he ate breakfast at 7:15, worked until 8, left the house at 8:30, and returned by 7 in the evening, a schedule so consistent it might have been printed in a manual. She learned that the mansion was beautiful in the way of things that have been carefully preserved rather than freely lived in. She learned that it was very, very quiet. The silence in her family's home, a 4-room house in a village 2 hours outside the city, crowded with her parents and 2 younger brothers and 1 very opinionated grandmother, had been a different category of thing entirely. That silence was the brief pause between conversations, the moment before the rice pot boiled over, the comfortable quiet of people who had said everything necessary and were simply existing in each other's presence. This silence was an absence. She tried to behave. She tried to move through her days with the careful neutrality Helen's notes advised. She managed it for approximately a week. Then she started humming. It crept up on her the way it always did. Her hands were busy. Her mind was elsewhere. A song from childhood simply surfaced and found its way out before she thought to stop it. Festival music first, then a pop song her younger brother had been obsessed with for 2 years. Then, embarrassingly, a lullaby her mother used to sing when any of them was ill. She tried to keep it quiet, but the mansion's acoustics were excellent. She was cleaning the upper hallway one morning, moving between rooms with a cloth and a bottle of wood polish, humming something she couldn't have named if asked. Some hybrid of 3 different songs, the way melodies combined when her mind wasn't supervising, when she turned and found Mr. Kang standing at the far end of the corridor. He had come upstairs silently, or she had simply been too absorbed to hear him. He was holding a folder of documents and watching her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. She cut off mid-note. I apologize, sir. I'll stop immediately. It won't happen. No. The word came after a pause long enough that she'd already started to turn away. She turned back. His expression had not changed significantly, but something in it had shifted, some fractional adjustment she couldn't name. Continue, he said. It's fine. He looked at the folder in his hands and went back downstairs. Jaya stood in the hallway for a moment, cloth still raised, processing the exchange. Then, very softly, she began humming again. She did not know it yet, could not have known it, but she had just broken the first rule the mansion had kept for 13 years. She had made it loud enough to be heard. Min-jun arrived on a Thursday, unannounced, which Jaya learned was his customary mode of return. She was in the kitchen wrestling with a jar of preserved plums that had apparently been sealed by someone who intended them to last centuries. She had tried a dish towel. She had tried running hot water over the lid. She was considering, not entirely seriously, the cleaver. Here, said a voice behind her, easy and warm. Let me. She spun around. The man was perhaps 32. He had Mr. Kang's height but not his stillness, the same strong jaw but with a mouth that looked accustomed to humor. His jacket was slung over one shoulder, his tie loosened. His sleeves already rolled as he reached past her and took the jar with the confidence of someone who has lost enough battles with stubborn lids to have developed a reliable technique. One firm twist, a satisfying pop of releasing pressure. He handed it back with a modest flourish. I've been perfecting that for years, he said. You have to push down while you turn. Most people just turn. She stared at him. You're Mr. Kang's son? Min-jun, he said. If you call me sir, I'll feel ancient and it will ruin my whole visit. He looked around the kitchen with the fond, slightly bemused expression of someone encountering a beloved childhood landscape that has been meticulously maintained in their absence. "You must be the new maid. The agency sent you?" "Yes. I've been here 3 weeks." He nodded, and she had the odd sensation that he was evaluating her not professionally but personally. Not whether she could do the job, but what kind of person she was. It felt different from his father's assessment. Warmer. More curious. "How are you finding it?" he asked. She considered giving a professional answer. "It's a beautiful house," she said instead honestly. "It's also very quiet." Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. "Yes," he said. "It is." He had not planned to stay more than 2 days. He stayed for 10. He told himself this was because there were administrative matters to address. His father's investments, a charitable foundation his mother had established that had been running on minimal oversight for the better part of a year. These things were real, and they genuinely required attention. But he also stayed because the kitchen, which had been a purely functional room for as long as he could remember, had become somewhere he wanted to be. Because there was coffee in the morning, and Jaya had a habit of making too much, and the excess was there on the counter and it seemed wasteful not to have a cup. Because she asked about his work in a way that was genuinely curious rather than politely performative. And because she told him about her village and her family with an openness that was completely at odds with the careful guardedness he had grown up around. He brought her food. He passed a street cart on the second day, and she had mentioned, offhandedly, that the city version of her hometown's fish cakes was never quite right. He found the best vendor 3 blocks away from a lunch meeting, bought more than one person could reasonably eat, and brought them back in paper containers that were already developing grease spots by the time he reached the kitchen. "I walked 6 blocks in business shoes," he announced, setting them on the counter. "If you don't eat them, I will eat all of them myself, and my doctor will be very angry." She looked at the containers. At him. Something in her expression went momentarily soft in a way she seemed to catch and correct quickly. Then she laughed, sudden and genuine, a bright unguarded sound that rang off the kitchen tile and found its way down the corridor to the study, where Mr. Kang sat at his desk with a pen in his hand and felt something contract in his chest. Not pain. Something considerably more difficult. Mr. Kang's care for Jaya did not announce itself. It operated the way deep water does, invisibly by displacement. He noticed her shoes first. They were decent quality but worn through on the inside at the heel, the way shoes wear when someone is on their feet for 10 or 11 hours a day. He said nothing. A week later, an identical pair appeared outside her door, in her size, with a brief note from an unnamed household account about replacement of work equipment. She held the shoes and read the note 3 times. She thought about asking. She decided not to. He noticed her rubbing her wrists one afternoon in the way that meant the repetitive work was catching up with her. The following week, her workload had been quietly redistributed. The heaviest cleaning tasks shifted to an additional twice-monthly service that had apparently been arranged through the agency. Her schedule became marginally saner. He noticed, when she thought no one was watching, that she counted things. Not obsessively but habitually, the small accounting of someone who had learned early that the difference between enough and not enough was a number, and numbers required monitoring. He made quiet inquiries. He learned something of her family's situation. He made other arrangements anonymously, through channels that would be difficult to trace. Stood there in the kitchen for a moment in the early morning quiet. She knew, in the way one knows things that have not been explicitly stated, that Mr. Kang was responsible for these quiet kindnesses. She also knew that he would deny it with complete composure if she raised the subject, and that asking would cause him some obscure discomfort that she had no wish to inflict. Min-jun made her laugh. Mr. Kang made her feel as though the world were steady underfoot. She was 23 years old and had not expected, coming to this house with her worn suitcase and her borrowed prayers, to feel loved by father and son. Her heart did not know how to choose between sunlight and shelter. The fragile balance shifted. The night rain trapped her in the courtyard with an armful of laundry. Min-jun appeared without hesitation, taking the basket and holding his jacket over her head as they ran to cover. "You'll catch a cold," he said, breathless and smiling. From his study window, Mr. Kang watched. Not anger. Something more vulnerable flickered in his eyes. Fear. the fear of losing the one warmth that had entered his life in years. Days later, he asked Jaya to accompany him to a charity gala, officially as assistants. In truth, he simply did not want to enter another crowded room alone. He chose her dress with meticulous care, modest, elegant, respectful. When she stepped into the room wearing it, her nervous fingers smoothing the fabric, he found himself momentarily unable to speak. "You look presentable," he said at last. It was the highest compliment he knew how to give. At the gala, whispers followed them, but for the first time in years, Mr. Kang did not feel like a ghost moving through his own life. Jaya's presence anchored him. Min-jun arrived unexpectedly and froze at the sight of them together. Jealousy flared, not possessive but wounded. He had believed his father incapable of love. Seeing the softness in his eyes unsettled him. He thought, "Is my father after the woman I want?" Min-jun comes home with flowers and all sorts of gifts to please Jaya. Mr. Kang promised to sponsor and revamp her educational background, since only had her first degree. Min-jun would display his affection and sometimes say unpleasant things about his father. Jaya would immediately reprimand him. She had always preached peace between father and son. She had fearlessly told Mr. Kang one evening, "Sir, it would give me joy to see you and Sir Min-jun get along with each other, and brings laughter to the tables in this home." Mr. Kang had waved off her gestures and told her not to say things like that anymore. But he secretly admires her vigor to want to unite them. One Tuesday afternoon, he collapsed. She found him. She had gone to bring the afternoon tea and knocked with no answer, which was unusual. She opened the study door and he was on the floor between the desk and the window, breathing but unconscious, one hand outstretched toward the telephone. She did not panic. She called the emergency services with complete clarity, stated the address and the situation, unlocked the front gate remotely from the panel by the door, and then went back to him and knelt on the floor and said his name and held his hand and waited. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. She rode with him. At the hospital, she called Min-jun. She said, "Your father is in surgery. Come." She gave him the details. She hung up and went back to waiting. The surgery was long. The surgeon was honest with her in the way that surgeons are when the outcome is uncertain, informative but careful, not promising what he could not promise. The recovery would be slow. The risks were not trivial. Min-jun rushed to the hospital, his composure breaking as he saw his father unconscious, machines breathing rhythm into a body that had always seemed indestructible. Regret flooded him. They had wasted years in silence. Jaya refused to leave the hospital. She slept in waiting chairs, prayed quietly, and held his hand when the nurses allowed it. When doctors announced a shortage of his rare blood type, Jaya stepped forward without hesitation. "I'm a match," she said. Min-jun stared at her. "You don't have to do this. He gave me a future," she whispered. "Let me give him time." The transfusion left her weak and pale, but she refused to rest until she knew he was stable. Days blurred into nights. She whispered encouragement to him as if her voice could guide him back. Min-jun watched everything. Her exhaustion, her devotion, the way his father's hand relaxed in hers even in unconsciousness. For the first time, he understood. This was not infatuation. This was love. Later, Min-jun found her in the corridor. "You love him," he said gently. She shook her head, tears falling. "He deserves happiness. But I don't belong in his world. You are the only reason he wants to live in it," Min-jun replied. What Min-jun felt was real. At the same time, he had also come to understand, with the same honesty, the nature of what he was watching. Had watched it unfold the way you watch something take shape from a distance, recognizing the pattern before those inside it can see it clearly. This was not competition. This was not loss. He put his arm around her shoulders, briefly, in the way of a person offering warmth without expectation. "He's going to be okay," he said. "I know," she said, and she meant it with a completeness that was not wishful thinking but something sturdier. They sat in the waiting room until the sky outside the windows began to lighten. Mr. Kang woke to find her asleep in the chair beside his bed, one hand loosely wrapped around his. She had been there through the night and most of the following day, nodding off only when she was sure there were others present, returning whenever she wasn't. He lay still for a moment, taking in the ceiling, the particular quality of hospital light, the low sounds of the ward beyond the room's partition. He had the sensation of returning to a place from a significant distance, not immediately oriented, cataloging evidence. His hand, her hand around it. He looked at her face, relaxed in sleep, the careful composure she wore by habit temporarily dissolved. "You stayed," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Her eyes opened. She sat up without entirely losing the thread of unconsciousness, blinking slowly. Then her focus sharpened and her expression shifted, relief first, and then something she let be visible for a moment before settling into professional care. "You scared us," she said. The word arrived quietly. He turned it over in his mind. 2 letters, 1 syllable, and yet it seemed to change the acoustics of the room significantly, to make it warmer somehow, to make the ceiling less distant and the light less clinical. He found he had nothing adequate to say, so he said nothing, but he did not let go of her hand. Recovery was slow, as it always is when the body has been genuinely frightened into cooperation. Min-jun returned permanently. He had spoken to the Singapore team and arranged a compromise, a regional role that could be managed significantly from home with travel as needed. It was not the original offer. It was something better suited to a man who had returned to his father's house and found, unexpectedly, that he wanted to stay. He launched the foundation properly, giving it the operational infrastructure it had lacked. He carried his mother's name, and he carried the work the way you carry something you've been saving for the right moment. Jaya introduced laughter to the kitchen. She did not do this strategically. She simply existed there with the same quality she had always had. Open, curious, genuinely delighted by things, inclined toward song when her hands were busy. The kitchen responded by becoming, gradually, a place people came to rather than through. Mr. Kang ate dinner with them, at first occasionally, then regularly, then as a matter of course, the way habits form when the alternative becomes gradually unimaginable. One evening, Min-jun announced he would cook. He said this with full confidence, which is exactly the kind of confidence that precedes disaster. The disaster, when it arrived, was thorough and spectacular. The smoke alarm contributed its opinion. The kitchen filled with something that was technically related to smoke but had its own distinct character. Jaya laughed until she had to sit down on the floor and even then could not entirely stop. Mr. Kang, who had come to investigate the noise, stood in the kitchen doorway surveying the scene. Then he went to the stove. He moved Jaya's rice from the burner and replaced it with water and rice in a pot he selected from the back of the cabinet. And he proceeded to demonstrate that he had at some point in his life observed the cooking of rice with sufficient attention to reproduce the basic conditions. What emerged from the pot 20 minutes later was not rice in the conventional sense. Min-jun looked at it. "What did you do to it?" he asked. "I followed the standard procedure," his father said, with the complete conviction of a man who has made a fundamental error and has not yet located it. This could be used for structural purposes. Jaya, who had recovered sufficiently to stand, covered her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook. Mr. Kang looked at the pot. He looked at his son. He looked at the woman trying very hard not to laugh at his expense, and failing, and not apologizing for it. Something gave way in him. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, like a window opened in a room that has been closed for a long time. But the air that came in was fresh in a way that changed the quality of the room. He laughed. Not loudly, not for long. But it was real, and both Min-jun and Jaya heard it, and both of them stilled for just a moment in the way of people who have received something unexpected and valuable. The garden in late December held its frost and its lantern light with equal ease. They had taken to ending evenings there when the weather permitted, which in that part of the country meant bundled coats and gloves and breath visible in the air. But they had all decided, independently and then collectively, that outside was worth it. Mr. Kang found her there one evening after Min-jun had gone inside. She was looking at the fountain, which had been drained for winter but still caught the lantern light on its stone rim. Her coat was too thin for the temperature, or would have been without the wool shawl underneath it. He stood beside her. For a while they both looked at the garden. I spent 13 years managing this house correctly, he said. Came out quiet, not like a speech. More like a thought that had found words. Every room maintained. Every schedule observed. I believed that was sufficient. He paused. I knew it was not. But belief has its uses. She did not say anything. She waited the way she had learned to wait. Patiently, without filling silence with noise. You came here with a suitcase, he continued. And you hummed in the corridor, and you were afraid to knock on the front door. He looked at her profile. You have made this house impossible to manage correctly. Nothing is where I left it. You have rearranged things I did not know could be rearranged. She turned to look at him. His expression was, for the first time in her memory, simply open. Not controlled. Not assessed. Present. Stay, he said. Not as an employee. I am asking you to stay as... He stopped. The words seemed to cost him something. I am asking you to consider whether you might be willing to build a life here. With me. The garden was very quiet. The lanterns swayed in a small wind. Sleep ran away from her. She thought of the age difference, the race difference, and difficulty sets in. Even though she had developed something for the man, it's safe to say she felt secured and safe with him, just as a daughter would her father. She sought advice from her mother, and she saw no issues with it. She walked into Mr. Kang's study, gave him his cup of coffee, and said, I will stay. I will stay with you. Mr. Kang gathered other domestic staff and gave instructions on how to serve her. He bought an expensive wine and they all celebrated. Wedding plans were on, dowry sent to her family, and Mr. Kang felt like a child. Life was worth living. He took his exercises seriously and ate healthy. Helen visited with her child. She was overjoyed when she saw how Mr. Kang expressed himself as though he's a child. Min-jun took the baby and Helen bonded with Jaya. In the kitchen, Jaya made tea. Helen sat across from her and they talked the way women talk when there is a lot to cover. Easily, moving between subjects, circling back to things that needed more time. It's different, Helen said, looking around the kitchen, the garden visible through the window, the sounds of the house. Music from somewhere upstairs, Min-jun's voice doing dramatic effects for an audience of one very small child. Yes, Jaya said. Good different. Yes. Helen looked at her carefully, at the quality of ease she wore in this kitchen, the way the house seemed to fit around her rather than the other way around. You're happy, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Jaya considered the word. I didn't come here expecting to be, she said. I came here to work hard and send money home. And I still do those things. She smiled. I just do other things too. The wedding was held in the garden on a morning in May, when the gardens had recovered from winter and were making their annual argument for beauty. It was not large. It was not formal in the way that wealth sometimes makes things formal. Stiff and performative, pleasure operating at a remove from itself. It was warm. Children from the foundation ran between the chairs. Helen's baby, now of an age to have opinions about parties, had opinions about this one. The fountain had been restored and caught the morning light. Min-jun gave the speech. He had written and discarded 4 versions, each of which suffered from the same problem. They were too careful, too considered. They explained things that did not need explaining to an audience that already understood them. He set aside his notes. I grew up in this house, he said. I know what it was. It was beautiful and it was quiet, and it was my father's monument to doing everything correctly in the absence of reasons to do anything at all. He paused. I used to think that was grief. But it was also a choice. And choices can be revised. He looked at Jaya, standing in the morning light in a dress the color of cream with her hair simply arranged in flowers at her wrist, and then at his father, standing beside her with the expression of a man who has discovered, late, that astonishment is not always unwelcome. She came here with a broken suitcase and a song, Min-jun said. And she was more afraid than she let on, and she worked hard enough to justify staying. And somewhere in there she made this house remember that it was supposed to be a home. He raised his glass. I used to think love was something you had to go looking for. It turns out sometimes it comes to the door, and you just have to be brave enough not to send it away. Laughter. Applause. The particular warmth of an outdoor gathering when the weather has cooperated. The lanterns were lit at dusk, swaying in a small warm wind, and the Kang mansion, which had stood in glass and pale stone through 13 years of perfect empty silence, was full at last of exactly the right kind of noise. Please, subscribe to this channel if you're entertained by this story. Like the video and drop your thoughts in the comments.